Hello and Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, hope all of you doing well. Our next lecture based on the standard theory of international trade. Learning outcomes. After this lecture, you will be able to understand more realistic model of international trade, assumptions of model, opportunity cost, increasing opportunity cost, production possibility frontier, PPF with increasing opportunity cost, community indifference curve, MRT, that is marginal rate of transformation, MRS, that is marginal rate of substitution, equilibrium in isolation, equilibrium in specialization and gains from trade. The standard theory of international trade. This lecture based on the International Economics by Dominic Salvatore. This is the chapter number 2 of this book. This chapter extends our simple trade model to the more realistic case of increasing opportunity cost. Taste or demand preferences are introduced with the community indifference curve. We then see how these forces of supply and demand determine the equilibrium of relative commodity prices. In each nation, in the absence of trade under increasing cost, this will also indicate the commodity of comparative advantage for each nation. Subsequently, we examine how, with trade, each nation gains by specializing into the production of commodity of its comparative advantage and exporting some of its output in exchange for commodity of its comparative disadvantage. The last section of this chapter shows how mutually beneficial trade is possible, even when two nations are exactly alike except for taste under increasing cost condition. So this topic we will discuss in the next lecture. In this and the following chapters, it will be convenient to generalize the presentation and deal with the nation 1 and nation 2 instead of the previous chapter, the United States and United Kingdom, and the commodity X and commodity Y instead of wheat and cloth. Model assumptions. The following are the model assumptions. Two nations, that is nation 1 and nation 2. Two goods, that is good 1 and good Y, good X and good Y. Increasing opportunity cost. Let's start from increasing opportunity cost. First, we understand the concept of opportunity cost. What is opportunity cost? Actually, the opportunity cost is the foregone cost. The cost of one good in terms of other goods which could have been produced with the same factors of production. Now come to the increasing opportunity cost. It is more realistic for a nation to face increasing rather than the constant opportunity cost. Increasing opportunity cost means that the nation must give up, must forego more and more of one commodity to release just enough resources to produce each additional unit of another commodity. Increasing opportunity cost results in production frontier, that is concave from the origin rather than the straight line. Look at the production possibility frontier curve with increasing opportunity cost of nation 1 and nation 2. Number 1, nation 1 production possibility frontier curve, and the second one is the nation 2 production possibility frontier curve. Nation 1 production possibility frontier curve is the flatter, relatively flatter as compared to the nation 2 frontier curve is the steeper. This shows that nation 1 has a comparative advantage in producing X as compared to Y, and has an absolute advantage or comparative advantage in goods X, while the nation 2 has a comparative advantage in producing good Y. Production frontier of nation 1 and nation 2 with increasing cost. Concave production frontier reflects increasing opportunity cost in each nation in the production of both commodities. Thus, nation 1 must give up more and more of Y for each additional batch of 20x that is produced. It is illustrated by the downward arrows of increasing length. Similarly, nation 2 incur the increasing opportunity cost in terms of foregone X for each additional batch of 20 Y in production. MRT. What is MRT? The marginal rate of transformation of X for Y refers to the amount of Y that a nation must give up to produce each additional unit of X. MRT, another name for the opportunity cost of X, and is given by the slope of the production frontier at the point of production. Community indifference curve, community ICs. पहले मैं आपको बताता चलूं कि इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड जो है उसको समझने के लिए आपके पास प्रायर बेसिक माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक और मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स का नॉलेज होना चाहिए. So far we have discussed the production of supply, consideration in a nation as reflected in its production frontier. We now introduce the tastes or demand preferences in a nation. These are given by the community or social indifference curve. A community indifference curve shows the various combination of two commodities that yield equal satisfaction of community or nation. Higher curves refer to the greater satisfaction. These are the assumptions of the community indifference curve. These are analogous to the community indifference curve are analogous to the indifference curve, that is the microeconomic theory of consumer behavior. The assumptions of the community indifference curve same as the indifference curve theory, IC theory of the microeconomics. Assumption number 1, higher curves refer to the greater satisfaction, lower curve to less satisfaction. Community indifference curve are negatively sloped and convex from the origin. To be useful, they must not cross each other. These are the community indifference curve, diagram of the community indifference curve. Number 1 diagram is the community indifference curve of the nation 1, and number 2 is the community indifference curve of the nation 2. And a nation 1 community indifference curve relatively flatter, and nation 2 community indifference curve are the relatively steeper. Nation 1 community indifference curve 1, 2 and 3, and there are two bundle of goods in one, A and N, T and H, and the last one is E. Number 3 is the highest indifference curve, give the more satisfaction as compared to the number 1, same as in the nation 2. Explanation of the indifference curve are the community indifference curve for nation 1 and nation 2. A community indifference curve shows the various combination of X and Y that is yield equal satisfaction to the community or the nation. Higher curve refers to a higher level of satisfaction. Community indifference curve are downward or negatively sloped and convex from origin. To be useful, they must not cross. The declining slope of the curve reflects the diminishing marginal rate of substitution, MRS of X for Y in consumption. The marginal rate of substitution of X for Y in consumption refer to the amount of Y that a nation could give up for extra unit of X and still remains on the same indifference curve. This is given by the absolute slope of the community indifference curve at the point of consumption and decline as the nation moves from the curve. For example, the slope of the MRS of the indifference curve 1 is greater than at point N than at point A. In figure 3.2, that is the previous slides, on the previous slides. Similarly, the slope of MRS of indifference curve I prime is greater than at point A prime than at R prime. The decline in MRS or absolute slope of the indifference curve is a reflection of the fact that more of X and less of Y a nation consumes. More valuable to the nation is a unit of Y at margin compared with the unit of X. Therefore, the nation can give up less and less of Y for each additional unit of X it wants. Now come to the equilibrium in isolation. That is the equilibrium of nation 1 and nation 2 in the absence of trade. Now we join the two previous diagrams, that is the production possibility frontier curve and the community indifference curve. In the absence of trade, a nation is in equilibrium when it reaches the highest indifference curve possible given its production frontier. This occurs at the point where the community indifference curve is tangent to the nation production frontier. Common slope of the two curves at the tendency point gives the internal equilibrium relative commodity prices the nation and reflects the nation's comparative advantage. Let's see what all this means. Here is the diagram, equilibrium in isolation, the nation 1 and nation 2. The black lines shows the production possibility frontier curve of the nation 1, relatively flatter curve, PPFC of nation 2, relatively steeper, indifference curve 1 and indifference curve 2 in nation 1, indifference curve 1 tangent at point A, where nation 1 consumes 50 unit of X and 60 of Y. Look at the diagram of the nation 2. Indifference curve I prime tangent at point A prime with the PPFC, and nation 2 consumes 85x unit of X and 40 of Y. Nation 1 is equilibrium or maximize its welfare in isolation by producing and consuming at point A, where its production frontier tangent to the indifference curve 1, the highest possible. Similarly, nation 2 is in equilibrium at point A prime, where the production frontier is tangent to the indifference curve I prime. The equilibrium relative price of x in nation 1 given by the slope of the tangent common to its production frontier and indifference curve 1 at point A. This is price of A is 1 by 4, that is 0.25 for nation 2. Price of A prime is 4, since relative price of x is lower in nation 1 than in nation 2. Nation 1 has a comparative advantage in commodity X and nation 2 in commodity Y. Gains from trade. Look at the diagram. This diagram shows both nations after trade and specializing the production of their commodity of the comparative advantage. Look at the diagram in nation 1. Indifference curve 1 shows tangent at point A, and this point shows the equilibrium in isolation. When two nations agreed for trading, nation 1, because nation 1 has a comparative advantage in commodity X, that's why nation 1 specialize and produce X. So arrow shows that the production and specialization in X, and produce after exchanging its comparative advantage good, they produce and consume at the highest indifference curve. Similarly, nation 2. With trade, nation 1 moves from point A to point B in production by then exchanging 60x for 60y. With nation 2, nation 1 ends up consuming at point E. Thus, nation 1 gains 20x and 20y from trade. Similarly, nation 2 moves from point A prime to point B prime in the production by then exchanging 60y for 60 with nation 1. See trade triangle B prime C prime E prime. Nation 2 ends up consuming with E prime, point E prime, and also gains 20 and 20. Price of B is equal to price of B prime is equal to 1 is the equilibrium relative price, the price at which the trade is balanced. Thank you.